Right, lots to get across. Let's bring in my panel now. Sky News host of Across Australia, Peter Gleeson from Brisbane, and Radio 2GB broadcaster and Sky News host, Chris Smith from Sydney. I'm just going to have one question on this crisis in Victoria, and then I want to move on to some other issues if I can, gentlemen. But on the modelling issue, Chris, this seems to indicate Victoria's not even yet reached its peak. The peak is predicted to be greater than 1,000 infections a day, and we know if they're in a particular age cohort, that means obviously a lot of deaths. This comes after Victoria's had the hardest and longest lockdowns anywhere else in the country, yet the Premier says this is a global disease and it's really got nothing to do with me. It's a real worry.
It's a real worry that he can lie so easily, as he did through that press conference today. If he wants to take responsibility for what he knows has failed, forget about who else in the gang of eight and what other bureaucrat is responsible. He says he will take responsibility. We already know it's botched, so he should be walking. We shouldn't be contending with him still being in charge of this. But just on those numbers, if you look at most of the state websites, they're saying that people remain with this virus for about 14 days until 21 days. So that particular scenario, although it seems to be frightening, 1,100 per day, that seems logical that you would have a lockdown, that 3 weeks into the lockdown, it would then change and then you'd start flattening the curve. Maybe this is worst case scenario, but I would have thought in 3 weeks' time, in September, I think Victorians have got some hope to look forward to.
Gleeson, reports today too, if Victoria was a country, it would rank 13th in the world for the greatest increase in cases in percentage terms. It puts us on a par with a whole range of developing nations in Africa. If you listen to the Federal Minister Michael Sukkar a bit earlier today on Sky, he's at least one of the ones in the federal parliament prepared to call out the state government here in Victoria. Let's take a listen.
We've got to deal in facts, and again, you know, the statistics speak for themselves. When you've got Victoria that has overwhelmingly nearly every single coronavirus case in this country, and you accept that it can't just be bad luck that Victoria is the only state that's in this position, I think naturally you ask the question is what have been the failures, what have been the local decision-making issues that have led us to this position?
We all deserve some answers.
Yeah, and I think that underscores, you know, the total lack of transparency and the obfuscation and the downright arrogance by Jenny Mikakos on Tuesday. That was the most appalling performance I have seen in a parliament in a long, long time. As Victorians, you know, their mental health is now being affected by the fact that they're in stage 4 lockdown. They're looking for answers. They're looking for some hope, a glimmer of hope. The lack of leadership in Victoria right now is absolutely appalling, and I think it's incumbent upon the Premier and the Health Minister to come out in the next few days and explain exactly what they know, because that's why people are so frustrated. They've been through one, they're going through another, they're angry.
I want to go to an education report out today. Real failures again. You know, it's this constant worry. As I said, we've never spent more on education in this country to get a poorer and poorer result, at least internationally. We're told last year, according to NAPLAN results, more than 15% of Year 7 students in New South Wales were at or below the national reading minimum standard. Now, we can't have kids leaving school, Chris, can we, in this country, surely, and getting into high school, passing primary school, but not being able to read.
You're so right. Now, I've done a lot of study into this because I've got 4 kids who are school age, and I've also spoken to Michael Carr-Gregg, who has been very vocal about the influence of devices, streaming movies, videos, and, of course, social media on kids, even at the primary school level. And he is convinced, from the research that he's looked at, that there's a thread of a lack of literacy, a lack of reading, a lack of understanding of the basics in countries where they have affluence at a very young age. So in other words, they're being distracted by the things and the devices that they can get their hands on, because we are a rich Western country, but that has an enormous influence on the difference to what you and I experienced when we were young, in our fallow time, in the times that we had spare, we would pick up a book. We would read a book before we went to bed. We would read a book on a lazy Sunday afternoon. That is not happening now, and I think we're seeing the fruits of all that coming to bear. And it's not just Australia. Many, many affluent Western countries are going through the same reduction in educational standards.
You are so true. Where I grew up, we had 3 channels on the TV. Most of the time they were on the blink, and you didn't have a remote. Remember the days you used to have to go over and negotiate with everyone in order to change the channel. But you got bored enough to read a book, Lisa. This is the problem. And the response today is that, all of these educators are supposedly going to take a pledge to do better. How about some of them lose their funding or lose their jobs? If this was a business and they weren't delivering the results, well, they'd be out of a job.
Smithy nailed it. I think it's got a lot to do with the fact that there are so many distractions nowadays. I think kids are very much distracted from the normal literacy and numeracy skills that we developed as kids. But I hark back to our days, Peter and Smithy, back in school. And I mean, when you think about it, there was always a cohort of kids that were gifted, that were pretty good, and there were always a cohort of kids that were not so good. But those ones that were not so good, the teachers would cuddle. They'd make sure that there was early intervention. They'd make sure that they were looked after. And I'm not sure that happens these days. I'm not sure that we intervene quickly enough to ensure that the ones who are stragglers are brought back up to the middle of the pack, because the stragglers are the ones. 15% is an extraordinary number to have.
It's high.
I mean, come out of year 7 and they can't read or write.
I'll get a message from my aunts, many of whom are teachers, who'll say the teachers are trying their best, and I think they are. I genuinely think they are, but I worry that the curriculum is so crowded nowadays with stuff that doesn't matter, to the detriment of the basics. And at home, as I said, kids are distracted, and that just makes it all the worse. As you said, Chris, not that I said. Chris Smith, Peter Gleeson.
Yeah, exactly. And look, parents too have got bigger workloads. There's not one parent sitting at home in every household as there was when we were young kids, driving us to pick up the book, make sure you get it back to the library, get another one tomorrow. None of that goes on because we're all too distracted, we're all too busy, and we've got to take some of the responsibility as parents. And ministers need to clear the clutter out of the curriculum. All right, gentlemen, thank you as always.